Maya Johnson stepped out of her mother's old Honda Civic and stared up at the imposing brick facade of Westfield Preparatory Academy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, where clusters of students in crisp uniforms chatted easily with one another. Their voices carried notes of privilege and confidence that Maya had never quite mastered, despite her mother's countless hours of coaching on proper speech and manners. "You've got this, baby girl," her mother, Denise, said from the driver's seat. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the double shifts she'd been pulling at the hospital to afford Maya's tuition at this elite institution. "Remember what we talked about. Keep your head high, work twice as hard, and show them what you're made of." Maya nodded, clutching her worn leather satchel tighter against her chest. Inside were notebooks she'd bought from the dollar store, carefully covered in brown paper bags to make them look more presentable. She'd spent the entire summer reading advanced mathematics textbooks from the public library, knowing she'd need every advantage she could get at a school like Westfield. The scholarship that brought her here came with strings attached. She had to maintain a perfect grade point average, participate in at least 2 extracurricular activities, and complete 40 hours of community service each semester. One slip, one moment of weakness, and she'd be back at Roosevelt High in her old neighborhood, watching her dreams of MIT evaporate like morning mist. As she walked through the main entrance, Maya noticed how conversations seemed to pause slightly when she passed. Eyes followed her movements, taking in her carefully ironed but clearly secondhand uniform, her natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the elaborate styles that seemed to be the norm here. She'd spent hours the night before researching the school's dress code, making sure every detail was perfect. The hallways of Westfield were like something from a movie. Trophy cases lined the walls, displaying decades of academic and athletic achievements. Oil paintings of distinguished alumni watched over students from their gilded frames. The floors were polished marble that reflected the morning light streaming through tall windows. Everything spoke of tradition, excellence, and money. Maya found her first class, advanced placement calculus, and slipped into a seat near the back. She'd always preferred to observe before engaging, a survival skill learned from years of navigating spaces where she didn't quite belong. The other students filtered in gradually, their conversations flowing effortlessly from weekend plans at country clubs to summer internships at their parents' companies. "Did you see the new scholarship, kid?" she heard someone whisper behind her. Maya's shoulders tensed, but she kept her eyes focused on her notebook, pretending to review formulas she'd already memorized. "My dad says they have to let a certain number of them in now," another voice responded. "Something about diversity quotas. Probably can't even keep up with the coursework here." The teacher, Mr. Richardson, entered the classroom with the kind of authoritative presence that immediately commanded attention. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his suit probably cost more than Maya's mother made in a month. He'd been teaching at Westfield for over 20 years, according to the research Maya had done, and was known for his rigorous standards and no-nonsense approach. "Good morning, class," Mr. Richardson began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "I trust you all had a productive summer reviewing your calculus fundamentals. Today we'll be diving into differential equations, and I expect everyone to keep pace. This isn't Roosevelt High or Lincoln Middle School. We don't slow down for anyone here." Maya felt her face burn at the casual mention of schools like the one she'd transferred from. She glanced around and noticed several students smirking in her direction. The message was clear. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. "Now then," Mr. Richardson continued, turning to write an equation on the whiteboard. "Who can tell me the derivative of this function?" The equation was complex, involving multiple variables and trigonometric functions. Maya studied it for a moment, her mind automatically working through the chain rule and product rule applications needed to solve it. She'd encountered similar problems in her summer preparation, but she hesitated to raise her hand. Drawing attention to herself this early might not be wise. A boy named Bradley Worthington III raised his hand confidently. Maya had already learned his name from the class roster and the casual way other students deferred to his opinions. His family had apparently donated an entire wing to the school library. The derivative would be. Bradley began, launching into an explanation that started confidently but quickly became muddled. Maya could see exactly where his logic went wrong, around the point where he failed to properly apply the chain rule to the inner function. Mr. Richardson listened patiently, then shook his head. Not quite, Mr. Worthington. Anyone else care to attempt it? Several other hands went up, but each subsequent answer contained similar errors. Maya watched in fascination as students who'd probably never received a grade below an A in their lives struggled with a problem that seemed straightforward to her. She began to wonder if perhaps the academic standards at Westfield weren't as impossibly high as she'd feared. "This is disappointing, class," Mr. Richardson said after the fifth incorrect answer. "I expected better preparation from you all. Perhaps we need to review some fundamentals before we can tackle more advanced concepts." Maya felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the same feeling she got when she solved a particularly challenging problem late at night in her bedroom. Her hand started to rise almost involuntarily, but she caught herself. Better to wait, to observe more, to understand the social dynamics before making herself visible. The class continued with Mr. Richardson working through simpler examples, clearly frustrated by his students' lack of preparation. Maya took detailed notes, not because she needed them for the mathematics, but because she was studying her classmates' reactions and responses. She needed to understand how things worked here if she was going to survive. After class, she gathered her things slowly, hoping to avoid the clusters of students that formed naturally around certain social centers. But as she headed for the door, she heard her name called. "Maya Johnson, isn't it?" The voice belonged to a girl named Stephanie Chun, whose family apparently owned a chain of luxury hotels. She was surrounded by three other girls, all of whom regarded Maya with expressions that mixed curiosity with something less welcoming. "Yes," Maya replied simply, clutching her bag straps. "We heard you got in on some kind of special scholarship," Stephanie continued, her tone carefully neutral. "That must be nice. Getting a free ride and all." "I earned my place here," Maya said quietly, meeting Stephanie's gaze directly. "Same as everyone else." One of the other girls, a redhead named Jessica, laughed softly. "I'm sure you did. It's just that the standards are probably different, you know? For scholarship students. More about need than ability." Maya felt anger flash through her, but she kept her expression calm. The entrance exam was the same for everyone. "Of course it was," Stephanie said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Well, good luck keeping up. The work here is pretty intense. Not everyone can handle it." As the group moved past her, Maya heard Jessica whisper to another girl, "Give it a semester. These charity cases usually figure out their in over their heads pretty quickly." Maya stood alone in the emptying classroom for a moment, letting the anger and determination war within her chest. She'd faced worse than whispered comments and casual cruelty. Growing up in her neighborhood had taught her that words could hurt, but they couldn't actually stop her unless she let them. Her next class was Advanced Placement English Literature, followed by AP Chemistry. In each room, she encountered similar dynamics. The other students weren't openly hostile, but they made it clear through subtle comments and body language that she was an outsider being tolerated rather than welcomed. During lunch, Maya found herself sitting alone at a table near the windows, eating a sandwich her mother had packed in a brown paper bag. Around her, groups of students discussed weekend plans that involved expensive restaurants and family trips to Europe. The casual way they talked about money made Maya acutely aware of every dollar her mother was sacrificing to give her this opportunity. She pulled out an advanced physics textbook she'd checked out from the public library and began reading about quantum mechanics. If she was going to prove herself here, she needed to be prepared for anything. The concepts were challenging, but she found herself genuinely excited by the complexity. This was why she'd wanted to come to Westfield in the first place. "Doing a little light reading?" The voice was male, tinged with amusement. Maya looked up to see a boy she didn't recognize standing near her table. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. Unlike the other students she'd encountered, his uniform was slightly rumpled, and his tie was loosened at the neck. "Just staying ahead," Maya replied carefully. "Quantum physics during lunch break," he said, shaking his head with a grin. "That's either really impressive or slightly concerning. I'm David Park, by the way, transfer student from California." "Maya Johnson." "Uh-huh, the famous scholarship student," David said. "But His tone held none of the condescension she'd grown accustomed to hearing. Mind if I sit? The popular kids won't talk to me because my family isn't rich enough, and the outcasts won't talk to me because I'm not weird enough. Turns out middle-class transfer students occupy a very lonely social niche. Despite herself, Maya smiled. Sure. David sat across from her and pulled out his own lunch, which appeared to be leftover Chinese takeout in a plastic container. So, quantum physics. Planning to revolutionize our understanding of reality before chemistry class. Just trying to stay ahead of the curve, Maya said. What's your story? Why transfer to Westfield? My parents think the education here will help me get into a better college. They're probably right, but they had to take out loans to afford it, which makes me about as popular as you are with the trust fund crowd. It was refreshing to talk to someone who understood the financial pressure she was under. What do you want to study in college? Computer science, probably. Maybe double major with mathematics. You. Engineering. Mechanical or aerospace? I haven't decided yet. David raised his eyebrows. Impressive. Those are tough fields. You must be pretty good at math. I do okay, Maya said modestly. Do okay probably means you could teach the calculus class better than Mr. Richardson. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. I just work hard. I sat behind you in calc this morning, David said. I saw you solving that derivative problem in your head while Bradley was stumbling through his wrong answer. Why didn't you raise your hand? The directness of his question caught Maya off guard. It seemed better to observe first. Learn how things work here before I start participating. Smart strategy, I guess. But at some point you're going to have to let them see what you can do. Otherwise they'll keep treating you like you don't belong here. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. As they gathered their things, David said, Hey, there's a study group that meets in the library after school. Nothing official, just a few of us working on homework together. You should come by if you want. Thanks, Maya said, genuinely surprised by the invitation. I might do that. Her afternoon classes passed more smoothly now that she had at least one friendly face to look for in the hallways. In AP Chemistry, she found herself paired with David for a lab experiment, and they worked together easily, their different approaches to problem-solving complementing each other well. The chemistry teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a young woman who seemed more approachable than Mr. Richardson. She moved around the lab checking on each pair of students, offering guidance and encouragement. When she reached Maya and David's station, she paused to examine their work. Excellent technique, you too, she said. Very precise measurements and clean documentation. Have either of you considered entering the science fair this year? What kind of projects do students usually do? Maya asked, genuinely interested. All kinds of things. Last year, a student designed a more efficient water filtration system. Another developed a biodegradable plastic alternative. The key is finding something you're passionate about and applying rigorous scientific methodology to explore it. After Mrs. Patterson moved on, David leaned over and whispered, See, you're already impressing the teachers. At this rate, you'll be valedictorian by Christmas. Maya shook her head, but she was smiling. For the first time since walking through Westfield's doors that morning, she felt like maybe she could actually succeed here. The work wasn't impossibly difficult, and at least one teacher seemed to recognize her abilities. The final class of the day was AP World History with Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who'd apparently been teaching at Westfield since before some of the buildings were constructed. His classroom was filled with artifacts from around the world, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a museum than a typical high school classroom. Today we begin our study of the Renaissance, Mr. Thompson announced, his voice still strong despite his apparent age. Who can tell me what factors led to this period of cultural and intellectual rebirth in Europe? Hands shot up around the classroom, and Maya listened as her classmates offered responses that sounded rehearsed, like they'd memorized them from expensive prep courses. The answers weren't wrong, but they lacked depth or original thinking. When Mr. Thompson asked for additional perspectives, Maya found herself raising her hand before she could second-guess the decision. Yes, Miss Johnson, I think the standard explanations focus too much on European factors and ignore the influence of Islamic scholarship, Maya said. European scholars gained access to Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved and expanded upon by scholars in the Islamic world. Without that foundation, the Renaissance couldn't have happened the way it did. The classroom fell silent. Maya could feel eyes on her, and for a moment she wondered if she'd made a mistake. But Mr. Thompson's face lit up with genuine interest. Excellent point, Miss Johnson. Can you elaborate on specific examples? Maya took a breath. Well, scholars like Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra, which became fundamental to Renaissance mathematics and science. Ibn Rushd's commentaries on Aristotle influenced Thomas Aquinas and other Christian philosophers. And cities like Cordoba and Baghdad were centers of learning, while much of Europe was still struggling with basic literacy. Outstanding, Mr. Thompson said, and Maya could hear the surprise in his voice. That's exactly the kind of critical thinking I hope to see from all of you this year. The interconnected nature of human knowledge and culture is far more complex than most textbooks suggest. After class, Maya gathered her things slowly, processing what had just happened. She'd spoken up, demonstrated her knowledge, and been praised for it. Maybe David was right about needing to show what she could do. As she headed toward her locker, she passed Bradley Worthington and his group of friends. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw her, and she heard Bradley mutter something about affirmative action before they continued down the hall. Maya's good mood deflated slightly, but she tried to focus on the positive interactions she'd had. Mrs. Patterson's encouragement, Mr. Thompson's genuine enthusiasm for her perspective, David's friendship. These things mattered more than the prejudice she was facing from some students. At her locker, she found a note that had been slipped through the vents. Her heart sank as she unfolded it and read the message written in block letters. Go back where you came from. You don't belong here. Maya stared at the paper for a long moment, feeling the familiar mix of anger and determination rising in her chest. She'd received similar messages at her old school when she'd been selected for advanced classes. Some people would always try to tear down others who threatened their sense of superiority. She crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, then began loading her backpack with textbooks. She had hours of studying ahead of her tonight, and she couldn't afford to let anonymous cowards distract her from her goals. As she walked toward the main entrance, she saw David waiting by the front doors. Ready for that study group? He asked. Fair warning, it's just me and 2 other kids. Not exactly the cool crowd. Perfect, Maya said. I'm not here to be popular. The library was quieter than she'd expected, with only a few students scattered among the tables. David led her to a corner where 2 other students were already working. He introduced them as Lisa Chun, a junior who was apparently some kind of math prodigy, and Marcus Williams, a sophomore who was already taking college-level chemistry courses. Don't let their age fool you, David said as they sat down. Lisa's probably going to solve P versus NP before she graduates, and Marcus is basically a walking chemistry textbook. Maya found herself relaxing as they worked through their assignments together. For the first time all day, she was in a space where intelligence was valued rather than hidden, where asking challenging questions was encouraged rather than seen as showing off. When Marcus struggled with a calculus concept that was prerequisite for his advanced chemistry work, Maya found herself naturally sliding into a teaching role, breaking down the problem into manageable steps and helping him understand the underlying principles. You're really good at explaining things, Lisa observed. Have you thought about tutoring? There's always demand here for people who can actually teach math instead of just showing off how smart they are. I might be interested, Maya said. Is there an official program? Sort of, David said. Mrs. Patterson coordinates it. She's always looking for students who can help others without being condescending about it. As they worked, Maya began to feel something she hadn't experienced since arriving at Westfield, a sense of belonging. These students didn't care about her scholarship status or her background. They cared about ideas, about learning, about pushing each other to think more deeply. By the time they packed up to leave, Maya felt like she'd found her people. The snide comments and anonymous notes couldn't touch the confidence she'd gained from this simple study session. Walking to the parking lot with David, she felt optimistic about the days ahead. Thanks for inviting me, she said. I needed that. No problem. Same time tomorrow. Definitely. Her mother was waiting in the Honda, looking tired but hopeful. How was the first day, baby? It was challenging, Maya said, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to worry her mother with stories of prejudice and isolation. But I think I'm going to be okay. The academics aren't as intimidating as I thought they'd be. I knew you'd do fine, Denise said, pride evident in her voice. You're stronger than any of those kids realize. As they drove home through the familiar streets of their 3 weeks into her time at Westfield Preparatory Academy, Maya Johnson had established herself as a formidable academic presence, though her social standing remained precarious. Her days fell into a rhythm that began at 5 in the morning with review sessions in her bedroom, and ended well past midnight with homework that challenged even her considerable abilities. The study group with David, Lisa, and Marcus had become the highlight of her school experience. Their afternoon sessions in the library attracted attention from other students seeking help, and word was spreading about the scholarship girl who could explain complex mathematical concepts better than some of the teachers. Mrs. Patterson had officially recruited Maya into the peer tutoring program, and she now spent 3 afternoons a week helping struggling students master chemistry and mathematics. The work was rewarding, but it also increased her visibility in ways that weren't always comfortable. I don't understand why she gets to tutor, Maya overheard Jessica Caldwell complaining to Stephanie Chun as they passed her table in the library. My family has donated thousands to this school, but they picked some charity case to represent the tutoring program. Maya kept her eyes focused on the chemical equation she was helping a sophomore named Tommy understand, but her jaw tightened. The criticism stung not because it was true, but because it reduced her accomplishments to her economic status. Maybe because she actually knows what she's talking about, Tommy said quietly once Jessica had passed. He was a sweet kid who struggled with science, but worked incredibly hard. You explained this stuff in 10 minutes better than Mr. Crenshaw did in a whole week. Thanks, Tommy. Let's try another problem, okay? The academic work itself continued to energize Maya. In calculus, she'd moved beyond simply understanding the material to seeing patterns and connections that sometimes escaped Mr. Richardson's attention. During one particularly complex lesson on integration techniques, she noticed an error in his example problem, but chose to approach him privately after class rather than correct him publicly. Mr. Richardson, I think there might be a small mistake in the third step of that last example, she said carefully, showing him her notebook where she'd worked through the problem correctly. He examined her work for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're absolutely right, Miss Johnson. Thank you for catching that. He paused, studying her more intently. Your mathematical intuition is quite advanced. Have you considered taking additional mathematics courses at the community college? I hadn't thought about that. Would that be allowed? For a student of your caliber, I'm sure we could arrange something. The local community college offers differential equations and linear algebra. You could take them in the evenings and receive high school credit. Maya felt a thrill of excitement. Advanced mathematics courses would strengthen her college applications and challenge her intellectually. I'd love to look into that. I'll speak with the guidance counselor about the arrangements. You have genuine mathematical talent, Miss Johnson. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The conversation stayed with Maya throughout the day. Mr. Richardson's acknowledgement of her abilities meant more than he probably realized. Here was a teacher who'd worked with privileged students for decades, recognizing her potential and encouraging her to pursue it. But recognition brought its own challenges. In her world history class, her contributions to discussions had become expected rather than welcomed by some students. When she offered a detailed analysis of the economic factors behind the 30 Years' War, she heard Bradley Worthington whisper to his friend, "Show off, probably looked it up on Wikipedia." Mr. Thompson, however, continued to encourage her participation. Miss Johnson raises an important point about the role of banking families in financing different sides of the conflict. This kind of economic analysis is exactly what I hope to see from all of you. After class, Bradley approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You know, Maya, you don't have to prove how smart you are every single day. We get it. You studied really hard to get here. I'm just participating in class discussions, Maya replied evenly. Right. But maybe dial it back a little. It's kind of awkward for the rest of us when you're constantly showing everyone up. This isn't a competition. Maya felt anger flash through her, but she kept her voice steady. Isn't academic excellence exactly what this school is supposed to be about? Bradley's smile became more strained. Of course, but there's a way to do things here. A tradition of how students conduct themselves. Maybe someone should explain the social expectations to you. I think I understand them perfectly, Maya said, meeting his gaze directly. Work hard, participate in class, help other students when they need it. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's not really my problem. She walked away before he could respond, but she could feel his anger following her down the hallway. She'd crossed some invisible line by refusing to diminish herself for his comfort. There would be consequences. They came sooner than she expected. The next morning, she found another note in her locker, this one more specific than the first. Academic scholarship doesn't mean you're actually smart. Stop embarrassing yourself in class. Maya crumpled the note and threw it away, but more appeared over the following days. Someone had clearly decided that her confidence needed to be broken down systematically. The messages were always anonymous, always designed to undermine her sense of belonging at Westfield. You should report these, David said when she finally told him about the notes during one of their study sessions. To who? They're anonymous, and I can't prove who's sending them. The administration takes harassment seriously here. They have a whole anti-bullying policy. Lisa looked up from her advanced statistics homework. David's right. My sister graduated from here 2 years ago, and she said they came down really hard on students who were targeting minorities or scholarship kids. I can handle some nasty notes, Maya said. I'm more concerned about keeping my grades up and maintaining my scholarship. That's exactly why you should report it, Marcus interjected. If someone's trying to intimidate you into underperforming, that affects your scholarship status. The school won't tolerate that. Maya considered their advice, but something in her resisted the idea of asking for protection. She'd handled worse situations on her own before coming to Westfield. Anonymous notes weren't going to break her spirit. Her resolve was tested the following week during a particularly important calculus exam. Maya had prepared extensively, working through practice problems until she could solve them in her sleep. The material wasn't difficult for her, but the pressure of maintaining her perfect grade point average made every test feel like a high-stakes performance. As she worked through the problems, she felt confident about her answers. The integration techniques they'd covered were complex, but she'd mastered them weeks ago. She finished with 20 minutes to spare and used the time to double-check her work, catching a small arithmetic error that could have cost her points. When Mr. Richardson returned the exams 3 days later, Maya felt a moment of confusion as she looked at her grade. 87%. She'd never received a B+ in mathematics in her life. She reviewed the exam carefully, trying to understand where she'd gone wrong. Her methodology was correct on every problem. Her algebra was clean and accurate, but several problems had been marked incorrect with minimal explanation. After class, she approached Mr. Richardson's desk with her exam in hand. Could you help me understand where I went wrong on these problems? I can't see the errors. He glanced at her paper briefly. Your approach was too unconventional, Miss Johnson. While your answers may be mathematically correct, you didn't follow the specific techniques we covered in class. Maya felt confused. But these methods are valid. In fact, they're more efficient than the approach in the textbook. Efficiency isn't the point. Following instructions is. If I ask you to solve a problem using integration by parts, I expect you to use integration by parts, not some alternative method you found in a library book. You never specified which method to use, Maya said carefully. I shouldn't have to. Students at this level should understand the expectations without everything being spelled out explicitly. Maya stared at him, beginning to understand what was happening. Her success in his class had been embarrassing him, particularly when she caught errors in his examples or suggested more elegant solutions. Now he was finding ways to penalize her for being too advanced. Could I redo the problems using the specific methods you prefer? She asked. The exam grade stands, Miss Johnson. Perhaps this will help you understand the importance of following conventional approaches. Maya left the classroom feeling shaken. An 87% wouldn't destroy her grade point average, but it was a warning shot. If Mr. Richardson decided to grade her more harshly going forward, it could jeopardize her scholarship. She spent her lunch period in the library, researching academic appeals processes and student rights policies. Westfield's handbook was thorough, but it gave teachers broad discretion in grading decisions. Proving bias would be nearly impossible, especially against a teacher with Mr. Richardson's reputation and tenure. You look like someone stole your lunch money, David said, sliding into the seat across from her. Maya showed him the exam, explaining what had happened during her conversation with Mr. Richardson. David's expression grew more serious as she talked. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You solve these problems correctly. More than correctly. Your methods are actually more sophisticated than what he taught us. But I can't prove he's grading me unfairly. It's his word against mine." "Maybe not," Lisa said, appearing with Marcus behind her. Word traveled fast in their study group. "My sister had a similar situation with a teacher who was threatened by smart female students. She started documenting everything. Every interaction, every grade, every comment. Created a pattern that the administration couldn't ignore." "That could work," Marcus agreed. "But you'd need allies. Other students who could testify about the inconsistency in grading." Maya felt a spark of hope. "Would you guys be willing to help?" "Of course," David said immediately. "We're all in his class. We can compare how he grades similar work differently." Over the next week, they implemented their plan carefully. David and Lisa intentionally used some of Maya's more advanced problem-solving techniques on homework assignments, while Marcus stuck to the conventional methods. They documented Mr. Richardson's responses, noted his comments, and tracked grade patterns. The results were revealing. When David used an elegant substitution technique that Maya had shown him, he received full credit and praise for creative thinking. When Maya used the same technique, she was marked down for not following standard procedures. But their investigation uncovered something more interesting than just grading bias. As Maya reviewed her returned homework and exams more carefully, she began to notice small errors in Mr. Richardson's answer keys. Problems where his solutions were mathematically incorrect, but he'd been marking student answers wrong based on his mistakes. "Look at this," she said during one of their library sessions, spreading out several assignments. Problem 15 from last week's homework. He marked everyone wrong, but his solution has a sign error in the third step. The correct answer is -12, not +12. Lisa examined the work carefully. "You're right. That's a pretty basic algebra mistake." "It's not just one problem," Maya continued. "I found 3 more on different assignments. He's been making computational errors and then grading student work based on the wrong answers." Marcus whistled softly. "That's more serious than biased grading. That's academic incompetence. What do we do with this information?" David asked. Maya had been thinking about that question for days. Reporting Mr. Richardson's errors would certainly vindicate her, but it would also create enemies among the faculty and administration. Teachers protected each other, especially against challenges from students. "I need more evidence," she said finally. "And I need to be absolutely certain before I make any accusations." The opportunity to gather that evidence came sooner than she expected. The following Monday, Mr. Richardson announced that they would be taking a practice SAT mathematics exam in preparation for college applications. "This will count as a major test grade," he explained. "The problems are designed to mirror the actual SAT format, so they'll be excellent preparation for your college entrance exams." Maya felt a familiar excitement. Standardized tests had always been her strength. The SAT mathematics section covered material she'd mastered years ago, and the format played to her ability to work quickly and accurately under pressure. But as she reviewed the practice test Mr. Richardson distributed, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Several of the problems contained errors. Not subtle mistakes that might confuse students, but clear mathematical impossibilities that made the problems unsolvable as written. Problem 23 asked students to find the maximum value of a function, but the function as written had no maximum. Problem 31 provided a word problem about compound interest, but the given information was internally contradictory. Maya checked and double-checked her analysis, but there was no doubt. The practice test was fundamentally flawed. She faced a difficult decision. She could take the test as written, explain why certain problems were unsolvable, and hope for partial credit. Or she could speak up before the exam began and risk being labeled as disruptive or disrespectful. The memory of Bradley Worthington's comments about knowing her place flashed through her mind. The anonymous notes threatening her for speaking up in class. The social pressure to stay quiet and not challenge authority. Then, she thought about her mother working double shifts to pay for this opportunity. About her dreams of studying engineering at MIT. About all the students who would struggle with impossible problems and blame themselves for not understanding. Maya raised her hand. "Mr. Richardson, I think there might be some errors in the practice test." The classroom fell silent. Mr. Richardson's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "What kind of errors, Miss Johnson?" "Mathematical errors. Problems that can't be solved as written." She could feel the tension in the room ratcheting up. Students turned to look at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. She was challenging a teacher's competence publicly, breaking an unspoken rule about respecting authority. "I'm sure any apparent errors are due to your misunderstanding of the problems," Mr. Richardson said coldly. "Perhaps you should focus on attempting the test rather than looking for excuses." "Could I show you specifically what I mean?" Maya persisted. "Miss Johnson, you are disrupting the class and wasting everyone's time. Either take the test as written or accept a 0 for the day." Maya felt every eye in the classroom on her. This was the moment that would define her place at Westfield Preparatory Academy. She could back down, apologize, and fade into the background where scholarship students were expected to remain. Or she could stand up for what was right, regardless of the social cost. She stood up from her desk, walked to the front of the classroom, and began writing on the whiteboard. "This is problem 23, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The function is f(x) equals negative x squared plus 2x minus 5. The problem asks for the maximum value, but let's complete the square to find the vertex." She worked through the algebra step by step, showing how the function could be rewritten as negative 1 times the quantity x minus 1 squared minus 4. The maximum value occurs at x equals 1, and that maximum value is negative 4. But look at the multiple choice answers. She pointed to the options listed on the test. The choices are positive 2, positive 4, positive 6, and positive 8. None of them are correct. The problem is asking for a positive maximum value of a function that only has negative outputs. The classroom remained silent, but she could see students working through the mathematics in their heads, beginning to understand what she was demonstrating. "Problem 31 has a similar issue," she continued, moving to another section of the board. "It says that Sarah invests $1,000 at 5% interest compounded annually, and after 3 years, she has $1,500. But let's check that math." She wrote out the compound interest formula and substituted the given values. 1,000 times 1.05 to the third power equals $1,157.63. The problem states she has $1,500, which is impossible with the given interest rate and time period. Maya turned back to face the class, her heart pounding but her voice remaining calm. "I'm not trying to disrupt the class or show off. I'm pointing out that these problems can't be solved as written. It's not fair to grade students on impossible questions." Mr. Richardson's face had gone through several color changes during her demonstration. The mathematical errors were obvious once she'd explained them, and every student in the room could see that she was correct. "Miss Johnson, report to the principal's office immediately," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Your disruptive behavior is unacceptable. Should I solve the other 3 problems with errors first?" Maya asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. She was offering to continue her demonstration, to show exactly how many mistakes were in his carefully prepared exam. The implication was clear. This wasn't an isolated error, but a pattern of incompetence. "Get out of my classroom," Mr. Richardson snapped. Maya gathered her things calmly, ignoring the mixture of shocked stares and whispered comments from her classmates. As she reached the door, she heard David speak up. "Mr. Richardson, if the problems have errors, shouldn't we postpone the test until they can be corrected?" "The test will proceed as scheduled," came the sharp reply. Maya walked down the empty hallway toward the principal's office, her mind already racing through the conversation she was about to have. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever happened next would determine whether she had a future at Westfield Preparatory Academy. But as she thought about the impossible problems her classmates were struggling with at that very moment, she knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes standing up for what was right was more important than fitting in. The secretary directed her to wait outside Principal Morrison's office. Through the glass door, she could see him on the phone, probably receiving Mr. Richardson's version of events. Maya used the time to organize her thoughts, reviewing the mathematical demonstrations she'd given and preparing to defend her actions. When Principal Morrison finally called her in, his expression was carefully neutral. He was a distinguished man in his 60s who'd been running Westfield for over a decade. Students spoke of him with a mixture of respect and fear. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Richardson tells me you disrupted his class and refused to follow his instructions. He's quite concerned about your attitude and behavior." "I can understand his concern," Maya said carefully. "But I believe there's more to the situation that you should know about." She explained what she'd discovered about the practice test, walking Principal Morrison through the same mathematical demonstrations she'd given to the class. She showed him the errors clearly and objectively, sticking to facts rather than interpretations. Principal Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally asking her to clarify a technical detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "These are serious allegations, Miss Johnson. You're claiming that a teacher with 20 years of experience distributed an exam with multiple mathematical errors." "I'm not claiming anything. I'm demonstrating mathematical facts. The errors exist regardless of who wrote the test or how experienced they are. And you felt it was appropriate to challenge your teacher publicly rather than addressing your concerns privately?" Maya chose her words carefully. "I raised my hand and asked to speak with him about the errors before the test began. He told me to take the test as written or accept a 0. I felt I had to show the class what I meant because other students would spend the entire period struggling with impossible problems." Principal Morrison picked up his phone and made a brief call to Mr. Richardson, asking him to bring the practice test to the office. While they waited, he asked Maya about her academic background and her experience at Westfield so far. "Your grades are exemplary," he noted, reviewing her file. "Teachers consistently praise your work ethic and mathematical ability. Mr. Richardson himself recommended you for advanced coursework just last week." "Yes, sir. I've been working hard to meet Westfield standards." When Mr. Richardson arrived, the tension in the room was immediately apparent. He handed over the test with obvious reluctance, his expression suggesting he knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Principal Morrison spent several minutes reviewing the problems Maya had identified, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The mathematics were straightforward enough that he could follow her reasoning, and the errors became undeniable once they were pointed out. "Mr. Richardson, can you explain how these errors occurred?" "The test was compiled from multiple sources," Mr. Richardson said defensively. "It's possible that some formatting errors occurred during the copying process." "These aren't formatting errors," Principal Morrison replied. "These are fundamental mathematical mistakes that make the problems unsolvable." The room fell silent. Maya could see Mr. Richardson struggling with the reality of his situation. He'd built his authority on his expertise, but that expertise was now being publicly questioned. "What would you like me to do about this situation?" Principal Morrison asked. "I'd like the record to show that Miss Johnson disrupted my class and showed disrespect for authority," Mr. Richardson said. "Her behavior was inappropriate regardless of any technical issues with the test. And I'd like the test to be corrected so that students can be assessed fairly," Maya said quietly. Principal Morrison looked between them thoughtfully. "Mr. Richardson, I think the appropriate response is to postpone the test until a corrected version can be prepared. Miss Johnson, while I understand your motivations, there are better ways to handle concerns about academic materials." It was a diplomatic solution that gave everyone a partial victory while avoiding the larger issues at stake. Maya nodded her acceptance, though she could see that Mr. Richardson was far from satisfied. However, Principal Morrison continued, "I think this situation raises important questions about our quality control processes for academic materials. I'd like to schedule a meeting with the mathematics department to review our procedures." After they were dismissed, Maya and Mr. Richardson walked back toward the mathematics wing in uncomfortable silence. She could feel his anger radiating beside her, and she knew that their relationship had been permanently altered. "You may have won this battle, Miss Johnson," he said quietly as they approached his classroom. "But you've made your time at this school much more difficult. Teachers talk to each other. Word gets around about students who cause problems." "I wasn't trying to cause problems," Maya replied. "I was trying to ensure that students were treated fairly." "Fairness is a luxury that scholarship students can't afford," Mr. Richardson said coldly. "You'd do well to remember that." Maya felt the words like a physical blow. The message was clear: know your place, accept whatever treatment you receive, and don't challenge authority. It was everything she'd been fighting against since the day she arrived at Westfield. As she rejoined her classmates for the remainder of the period, she could feel the shift in atmosphere. Some students looked at her with new respect, recognizing that she'd stood up for all of them. Others regarded her with suspicion or hostility, seeing her as a troublemaker who'd embarrassed their teacher. The anonymous note in her locker that afternoon was the most vicious yet. You think you're so smart, but you're just a diversity hire who doesn't know her place. Keep pushing and see what happens. The aftermath of Maya's confrontation with Mr. Richardson rippled through Westfield Preparatory Academy like stones thrown into still water. Word of her mathematical challenge to the practice SAT exam spread quickly through the student body, creating divided camps of supporters and detractors. Some students began approaching her with genuine respect for her academic courage, while others viewed her as an upstart who needed to be put back in her place. Maya's daily routine became a careful navigation of these social dynamics. The study group with David, Lisa, and Marcus provided a safe haven where her intellectual abilities were celebrated rather than resented. But the hallways and classrooms remained battlegrounds where every interaction carried the weight of larger prejudices and assumptions. Mrs. Patterson had quietly increased Maya's responsibilities in the peer tutoring program, recognizing that her approach to teaching complex concepts was uniquely effective. Maya found herself working with students who initially requested her help reluctantly, only to discover that she could explain advanced chemistry and mathematics more clearly than many of their previous tutors. "I don't understand how you make this stuff seem so simple," said Jennifer Walsh, a junior who'd been struggling with organic chemistry. "Mr. Davidson makes it sound like rocket science, but you explain molecular structure in a way that actually makes sense." Maya appreciated the validation, but she remained aware that her success was generating resentment among students who felt their positions of academic superiority were being threatened. The anonymous notes in her locker had increased in frequency and viciousness, suggesting that her challenges to Mr. Richardson had crossed lines that some people were unwilling to tolerate. The mathematics department meeting that Principal Morrison had promised took place the following week, though Maya wasn't privy to the details of what was discussed. However, the results were apparent in Mr. Richardson's subsequent behavior. His grading of her work became meticulously fair, though his interactions with her remained coldly professional. He no longer made the small errors in his examples that she'd been quietly correcting, suggesting that he was double-checking his work more carefully. But the larger tension at Westfield went deeper than one teacher's wounded pride. Maya began to notice patterns of behavior that suggested systematic problems with how the school handled academic excellence from unexpected sources. Teachers seemed to have different expectations for different students, and those expectations were often based on factors that had nothing to do with actual ability. The realization crystallized during her advanced placement English literature class, where she'd been analyzing the social dynamics in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, with the same systematic approach she applied to mathematical problems. When the teacher, Ms. Harper, asked the class to discuss the role of social class in the novel, Maya raised her hand. "Elizabeth Bennet faces prejudice because she doesn't fit the social expectations of her time," Maya said. "But her intelligence and moral character ultimately prove more valuable than inherited status or wealth. Austen is arguing that true worth isn't determined by circumstances of birth." "An interesting perspective," Ms. Harper replied, though her tone suggested mild condescension. "Though we should be careful not to read modern values into historical texts. Social hierarchy served important functions in Austen's world." Bradley Worthington immediately raised his hand. "I think Ms. Harper is right. Elizabeth Bennet succeeds because she learns to respect social conventions, not because she challenges them. She ends up marrying Darcy precisely because she accepts her place in society." "Excellent analysis, Bradley," Ms. Harper said warmly. "That demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of the text's historical context." Maya felt a familiar frustration rising. Bradley's interpretation was not only wrong, but it directly contradicted the novel's themes and plot development. Elizabeth Bennet succeeded specifically because she refused to accept limitations based on her social class. challenging both Darcy's initial prejudices and society's expectations for women of her status. But Maya had learned to pick her battles carefully. Challenging Bradley publicly would only reinforce perceptions that she was aggressive and disrespectful. Instead, she decided to demonstrate her point through her writing, crafting an essay that examined Austen's subversive critique of class-based prejudice with the same analytical rigor she applied to mathematical proofs. The essay she submitted was perhaps the best piece of literary analysis she'd ever written. She traced Elizabeth Bennet's character development through the novel, showing how Austen used her protagonist to challenge readers' assumptions about worth and social position. She connected the themes to broader questions about merit versus inheritance, individual judgment versus social conformity, and the difference between respect and deference. When Ms. Harper returned the essays 2 weeks later, Maya stared at her grade in disbelief. B-. The comments were brief and dismissive. Good effort, but your analysis lacks the sophistication expected at this level. Try to focus more on what the text actually says rather than imposing your own interpretations. Maya looked around the classroom, wondering what grades her classmates had received. During lunch, she asked David about his essay, which had covered similar themes but with less depth and supporting evidence. I got an A-, David said, showing her his paper. She said my analysis was thoughtful and well-supported. What did you get? Maya showed him her grade and comments. David read Ms. Harper's feedback with growing incredulity. This is ridiculous, he said. Your essay was better than mine in every possible way. You made connections I never even thought of. Maybe my interpretation was too controversial, Maya said, though she didn't believe it herself. Controversial? You were analyzing Jane Austen, not proposing to burn down the school. This is the same pattern we saw with Richardson. Maya felt a sinking realization. The grading bias wasn't limited to mathematics. It seemed to extend to any situation where she demonstrated intellectual abilities that exceeded her teacher's expectations for a scholarship student. That afternoon, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of accepting the unfair grades and moving on, she began systematically documenting every instance of inconsistent treatment she observed. Not just her own experiences, but patterns of bias that affected other students as well. She started with her own academic work, comparing her grades and feedback to those of classmates who submitted similar or inferior work. The patterns were stark once she began looking for them. Teachers consistently graded her more harshly than students from wealthy families, even when her work was objectively superior. But, as she expanded her investigation, Maya discovered something far more disturbing than individual teacher bias. The school's academic systems contained fundamental flaws that went beyond prejudice and into the realm of institutional dysfunction. It began with her preparation for the actual SAT exam, which was scheduled for the following month. Maya had been studying intensively, working through practice tests and reviewing areas where she might need improvement. But, as she examined multiple practice exams from different sources, she began to notice patterns of errors similar to what she'd found in Mr. Richardson's test. Some of the errors were clearly mistakes in transcription or formatting, but others appeared to be deliberate modifications designed to make certain problems more difficult or to test knowledge that wasn't actually covered by the SAT curriculum. Maya began to suspect that someone at Westfield was systematically altering practice materials. The discovery that confirmed her suspicions came during a late evening in the library, when she was working on a practice exam that the guidance counselor had recommended. The test was supposedly an official College Board practice exam, but several problems seemed oddly familiar. Maya pulled out her collection of practice materials and began comparing problems systematically. What she found made her stomach drop. Someone had been taking legitimate SAT practice problems and modifying them in ways that made them more difficult or occasionally impossible to solve. The modifications were subtle enough that most students wouldn't recognize them as errors, but sophisticated enough to significantly impact test performance. More troubling, the modifications seemed to follow patterns that would particularly disadvantage students who relied on mathematical creativity rather than rote memorization. The altered problems often eliminated elegant solution methods in favor of approaches that required extensive computational work, essentially penalizing students who thought outside conventional frameworks. Maya spent the next 3 nights cross-referencing every practice exam she could find, building a comprehensive database of alterations and modifications. The patterns were undeniable. Someone with access to Westfield's academic materials was systematically sabotaging practice exams, particularly those distributed to scholarship students and other high-risk populations. The implications were staggering. If students were practicing with flawed materials, their actual SAT performance would suffer, regardless of their natural abilities. Lower SAT scores would translate to fewer college options and reduced scholarship opportunities, effectively perpetuating the cycle of educational inequality. Maya realized she'd uncovered more than simple teacher bias or institutional prejudice. This was academic fraud on a scale that could destroy students' futures while maintaining plausible deniability. Teachers and administrators could always claim that struggling students simply weren't prepared for the academic rigor of elite institutions. But proving her discovery would require more than mathematical analysis. She needed to trace the source of the modified exams and demonstrate that the changes were deliberate rather than accidental. That meant investigating the administrative processes that controlled academic materials at Westfield. Maya began spending more time in the library, not just studying, but observing the patterns of who had access to what materials. She noticed that practice exams were distributed through different channels depending on the student's status. Regular students received materials directly from guidance counselors, while scholarship students often got theirs from a separate academic support program. She volunteered to help organize materials for the academic support program, giving her access to filing systems and distribution records. What she found there confirmed her worst suspicions. The program maintained 2 separate sets of practice materials, one labeled Standard Distribution and another labeled Remedial Support. The remedial support materials were the ones that had been systematically modified. Maya felt sick as she realized the full scope of what was happening. Under the guise of providing additional academic support to struggling students, someone was ensuring that those students would continue to struggle. The modifications were designed to maintain the appearance of equal opportunity while secretly guaranteeing unequal outcomes. But she still needed to identify who was responsible for creating and distributing the modified materials. That investigation led her to discover something even more shocking than the academic fraud itself. The person overseeing the academic support program was Dr. Margaret Thornton, the assistant principal for academic affairs. Dr. Thornton had been at Westfield for over 15 years, rising through the ranks from guidance counselor to her current position. She was known for her dedication to helping underprivileged students succeed academically. Maya struggled with the cognitive dissonance of her discovery. Dr. Thornton was supposed to be an ally, someone who understood the challenges facing students like Maya. The idea that she might be systematically undermining those same students seemed impossible. But the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Thornton had exclusive access to the practice materials, and her signature appeared on the distribution records for the modified exams. She'd created an entire system designed to maintain educational inequality while appearing to support academic equity. Maya spent a sleepless night considering her options. She could take her evidence to Principal Morrison, but Dr. Thornton was his deputy and close ally. She could go to the school board, but that would require political skills she didn't possess and connections she didn't have. She could contact the college board directly, but they would likely dismiss a complaint from a single student against an established institution. Or she could do what she'd done in Mr. Richardson's class, stand up and demonstrate the truth publicly, regardless of the personal consequences. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Dr. Thornton had scheduled a special session for scholarship students and others in the academic support program, ostensibly to review SAT strategies and build confidence before the upcoming exam. Maya signed up immediately, bringing with her a carefully prepared presentation of her own. The session took place in the school's main conference room, with about 30 students in attendance. Dr. Thornton began with an inspirational speech about overcoming obstacles and achieving academic excellence through hard work and determination. Her words rang hollow to Maya, who now understood them as elaborate deception. Success on the SAT requires intensive practice with authentic materials, Dr. Thornton explained. That's why we've prepared special practice exams that will challenge you beyond what you'll face on the actual test. If you can master these problems, the real exam will seem manageable. Maya felt anger burning in her chest as she listened to Dr. Thornton describe the modified materials as beneficial challenges rather than systematic sabotage. The other students nodded along, trusting that their academic support was genuine rather than fraudulent. When Dr. Thornton opened the floor for questions, Maya raised her hand. Dr. Thornton, I've been comparing the practice materials to official College Board exams, and I've noticed some significant discrepancies. Would you like me to show the group what I've found? Dr. Thornton's expression shifted subtly, but she maintained her professional composure. I'm sure any apparent discrepancies are due to the enhanced difficulty level I mentioned. These materials are designed to push you beyond your comfort zone. Could I demonstrate what I mean? Maya persisted. I think it would be helpful for everyone to understand exactly what we're working with. Maya could see Dr. Thornton calculating her options. Refusing to let Maya present would appear suspicious, but allowing the presentation might expose the fraud. Professional pride won out over caution. Of course, Maya. Please share your observations with the group. Maya walked to the front of the room and began writing on the whiteboard, her heart pounding but her voice steady. She'd rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times, knowing that she would only get one chance to make her case. This is problem 15 from last week's practice exam. She began, writing out a complex algebraic equation. The problem asks us to solve for x, but let's look at what happens when we apply standard solution techniques. She worked through the algebra step by step, showing how the equation simplified to a mathematical impossibility. We end up with 5 equals -3, which means the equation has no solution. But the multiple choice answers all assume the equation is solvable. Maya turned to face the group, seeing confusion and growing understanding on their faces. Now let me show you the same problem from the official College Board practice exam. She wrote out a similar but correctly formulated equation, demonstrating how it could be solved using the same techniques. The official version has a clear solution, x equals 2. Someone has modified the practice exam to make this problem unsolvable. The room fell silent as students began to grasp the implications. Maya continued her presentation, showing additional examples of modified problems, each one designed to frustrate and discourage rather than educate and prepare. These aren't enhanced challenges, she concluded. They're systematic modifications designed to make us fail. Someone has been sabotaging our test preparation while pretending to help us succeed. Dr. Thornton had grown progressively paler during Maya's presentation, but she attempted to maintain control of the situation. Maya, I think you've misunderstood the purpose of these materials. Advanced practice problems often appear impossible to students who haven't fully mastered the underlying concepts. Then, let's solve them together, Maya replied calmly. I've identified 15 modified problems across different practice exams. If they're solvable using advanced techniques, you should be able to demonstrate the solutions. It was a direct challenge that Dr. Thornton couldn't refuse without admitting defeat. She approached the whiteboard and attempted to work through one of the modified problems, but her solution quickly broke down into the same mathematical impossibilities that Maya had demonstrated. Perhaps we should table this discussion and return to our planned curriculum, Dr. Thornton said, her professional composure finally cracking. Why? Asked Marcus, who had been attending the session. If there are errors in our practice materials, shouldn't we fix them before the actual exam? I think we deserve answers, added another student. Maya just showed us that we've been studying impossible problems for months. Maya could see the moment when Dr. Thornton realized her system of deception was collapsing. The students in the room were no longer passive recipients of academic support. They were becoming active questioners of the authority that had been misleading them. This session is concluded, Dr. Thornton announced abruptly. I'll need to review the materials Maya has brought to my attention. But the damage was done. As students filed out of the conference room, Maya could hear them discussing what they'd witnessed. Word would spread quickly through the scholarship student community, and questions would be asked that Dr. Thornton wouldn't be able to answer satisfactorily. Maya gathered her materials slowly, knowing that she'd crossed another line from which there would be no return. She'd exposed not just individual bias or incompetence, but systematic fraud designed to maintain educational inequality. The consequences would be far more serious than a confrontation with a single teacher. Dr. Thornton approached her as the last students left the room. "Miss Johnson, I think we need to have a conversation about your future at this institution." "I think we do," Maya agreed. "But I also think we need to have a conversation about academic integrity and the responsibility of educators to their students." "You have no idea what you're dealing with here," Dr. Thornton said quietly. "The systems you're challenging have been in place for decades. They serve important purposes that someone like you couldn't possibly understand." "Enlighten me," Maya replied. "Help me understand how sabotaging students' test preparation serves any legitimate educational purpose." Dr. Thornton stared at her for a long moment, and Maya could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Finally, she spoke with an honesty that was more damaging than any lie. "Students like you, Maya, you come here with unrealistic expectations. You think that intelligence alone will open doors, that hard work guarantees success. But the world doesn't work that way. There are hierarchies, systems, traditions that have to be maintained." Maya felt a chill as she realized what Dr. Thornton was really saying. "So you've been ensuring that students like me fail to protect those hierarchies?" "I've been teaching lessons about realistic expectations. Better to learn them here, in a controlled environment, than to discover them later when the stakes are higher. By cheating us out of fair preparation for college entrance exams. By preparing you for a world that isn't fair," Dr. Thornton replied. "You can expose what you think you've discovered, Maya. You can make accusations and demand investigations. But you'll learn that institutions protect themselves, and individuals who threaten those institutions get crushed." Maya looked at Dr. Thornton with a mixture of pity and determination. "Maybe, but I'd rather be crushed fighting for what's right than succeed by accepting what's wrong." As Maya left the conference room, she knew that the real battle was just beginning. She'd uncovered systematic academic fraud, but proving it and forcing change would require resources and allies she didn't yet have. The anonymous notes in her locker had been replaced by something far more dangerous: open institutional hostility from people with the power to destroy her future. But she'd also discovered something that Dr. Thornton and her allies couldn't take away: the knowledge that her abilities were real, that her achievements were earned, and that the system designed to defeat her was fundamentally corrupt. Maya Johnson had come to Westfield Preparatory Academy to get an education. Instead, she'd received something more valuable: the understanding that sometimes the most important lessons come from recognizing when institutions fail their students, and the courage to fight back against that failure. The game had changed again. Maya was no longer just fighting for her own success, or even for fair treatment. She was fighting for the fundamental principle that education should lift students up rather than tear them down, regardless of their background or social status. And she was just getting started. Maya stared at the message for a long moment, then carefully folded it and put it in her backpack with the others. She was building a file of evidence, just as Lisa had suggested. But, more importantly, she was building her resolve. She'd proven today that she wouldn't be intimidated into silence, even when the cost was high. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she'd face them with the knowledge that her principles were stronger than other people's prejudices. The game had changed. Maya Johnson was no longer just trying to survive at Westfield Preparatory Academy. She was fighting to transform it. Iberhood, Maya reflected on the day's events. She'd faced her first taste of the challenges ahead, but she'd also found allies and discovered that her academic abilities could more than hold their own at Westfield. The anonymous note in her locker proved that some students were threatened by her presence. Good. That meant she was already making an impact. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she had homework to complete and dreams to pursue. The scholarship students before her had faced similar obstacles and succeeded. She would do the same. Maya Johnson was at Westfield Preparatory Academy to learn, to grow, and to prove that excellence could come from anywhere. The students who mocked her today would learn to respect her achievements tomorrow. She was just getting started.